Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, or good evening if you're in India, or the Middle East, or good night if you're in Australia. I'm going to talk about 2022 Russia-Ukraine conflict and its wider and future geo-strategic effects. By background, I'm a military and naval historian. I expect many of you will be familiar with the revelation of St. John. We see here, I think it's the black horse, the famine, which is coming in the wake of the war between Russia and Ukraine. And I shall refer to it as a war because if it looks like a war, feels like a war, it's probably a war. This, I think, very moving and striking graphic appeared on the front of the week. Will Russia's war unleash famine? Perhaps they might have given the horseman a different face. So it's the black horse of famine. We've had the pale horse of pestilence. We've already had that with COVID, and the white horse of conquest and the red horse of war are both underway. One of the most important things that people didn't, certainly in the West, didn't predict or didn't say much about was the fact that the Ukraine, with its wonderful black earth, Chornozemny, is the breadbasket for the world, or a lot of the world. And the Russian Navy has blockaded the Ukrainian coast. The Sea of Azov over here has been effectively isolated, partly because the Russians built a great big bridge across the Kerch Strait, which opened in 2018. And the port in Mariupol is not available to get stuff out. And so therefore attention is focused on the great port of Odessa, Odessa here. There are in fact three ports. You can see the three dredged channels there on this excellent Admiralty chart. Also, down here, just see it, Ostrov Zmini, Snake Island or Serpent's Island. The Russians captured this on the first day of the war. The Ukrainians recaptured it at the end of June. So that means that ships coming out of Odessa have got a relatively sheltered passage to here, where of course they come into Romanian territorial waters, and Romania is a member of NATO. So if they can get that far, they should be okay. So that's where Odessa is. Here we see some of the grain silos at Odessa. About 20 million tons of grain is stacked up there, waiting to go if it can. I was surprised and pleased to see that on the 22nd of July, Russia, Ukraine, and Turkey signed an agreement for safe passage of grain ships out of Odessa. That will be overseen by a joint team with Russians, Ukrainians, Turks, and the UN representatives on it. And what will happen is that ships leaving Odessa will have to be inspected by the Turks to make sure they're not carrying anything they shouldn't. And of course, ships going back in will be inspected by the joint team to ensure that they're not smuggling weapons to Ukraine. and of course, more importantly, ammunition, even more importantly, ammunition. The first ship, so those are the grain silos. You can see how big they are. There's 20 million tons in there. And the first ship actually left last week. The Rosoni registered in Freetown, Sierra Leone, and it's a completely international business shipping. One of the points of interest that's come to my attention as the editor of the International Journal of Maritime Crime and Security is that apparently Russians and Ukrainians working together as crew on ships are not arguing, because you don't argue, you don't talk politics when you're joint members of a ship. But can it last? Well, within 24 hours of the Rosoni leaving of the deal on the 22nd of July, the Russians dropped missiles on Odessa, and the thing is that the grain deal, such as it is not a ceasefire. It is not an armistice. It does not apply to military forces. It's just to get the grain out. Immediately after that, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov went to Africa to rally support for Russia, and he visited Egypt, Republic of Congo, that's Congo B, Congo Brazzaville, as opposed to Dr. Congo, which is, of course, is the Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda and Ethiopia. But the best photograph was actually from his stopover in Zimbabwe, so I thought I'd use that one. Before the war, Russia and Ukraine supplied more than 40% of Africa's wheat, 40%. And I see that we've got lots of representatives here from Egypt, and of course you get a lot of wheat from Ukraine, which is you were one of the countries that Lavrov visited. It's not just about Ukrainian grain, which is quite a good, easy to remember pun, really, isn't it? Ukrainian grain. This report by the UN Conference on Trade and Development was published on the 28th of June, so it's pretty up to date. And maritime trade disrupted. It's not just, as I said, about Ukrainian wheat. Many countries have, because it can't come from Ukraine, or hasn't for months, countries are going to have to source their grain elsewhere. And that means, of course, it's more expensive to transport it. Grains are of particular concern, given the leading role of the Russian Federation and Ukraine in food markets. And of course, we now have a concept of food security, and if people are starving or if prices go through the roof, then your food security is impaired. The price of transporting dry bulk goods such as grain, wet bulk is oil, dry bulk is grain, increased by nearly 60% between February and May. The Russian Federation, however, is also a giant in the market for fuel and fertilizer and for oil and gas. And if fertilizer becomes more expensive, then it's still more expensive to grow food. So there's a knock-on effect from all these things. Higher energy costs have also meant that the cost of maritime fuel has gone up. Very low sulfur oil, for example, and of course the shipping industry, like everything else, is getting greener, and new regulations have come in. Very low sulfur fuel oil has increased by 64% since the start of the year. So none of this is good. So shipping costs are rising, and if you can't see it terribly clearly, but you've got from that this is in dollars per day to operate a ship, has gone up from 10,000 in 2019 up to nearly 45,000. Part of this is the effect of the pandemic. Initially, the shipping market was depressed because of all the problems with crews couldn't embark because of the risk of COVID and so on. They couldn't land for the same reasons. And then these problems were sorted out. So there was immediately a spurt, a tailback had built up, if you like, which we then saw in 2021. Then the prices went down again as the backlogs went away. And then, of course, we had the war in Ukraine starting on the 24th of February. And so it's gone again. So this has had a major effect on the global economy. Actually, that's clearer. You can see it there. So this is a very useful report, this UNCTAD report. And as I've said, higher food prices. Total of 36 countries import more than 50% of their wheat from the Russian Federation and Ukraine alone. Ukraine exported 50 million tons of grain in 2021. So that's twice as much as is currently stacked up at Odessa. But of course, also we've got another harvest coming in. That will be made smaller because some of the territory is obviously occupied by the Russians. And there's a problem with fields, of course, is they tend to get mines in them. So doing your harvest is going to be a bit difficult as well. Container shipping has been disrupted as well. And you can see the effect on containers coming into Ukraine and into Russia. So Ukraine, virtually, well, there haven't been any since the 24th of February. Russia also has had a decline because it can't get its merchant ships through the Black Sea. But of course, they got the Baltic, they've got the Pacific Ocean, so they can have containers in by those routes, but the Ukrainians can't. I'm going to move on now to another dangerous outcome from this war, and that is, of course, nuclear power plants. Ukraine used to get about 40% of its electricity from nuclear power. This statement by the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, is issued on the 10th of March, so a couple of weeks after the war started, and it sets out a wish list, really, of what this framework for the safety and security of Ukraine's nuclear power plants should be. Physical integrity of the facilities, whether it's reactors, fuel ponds, or radioactive waste stores, must be maintained. in this regard, this is Zaporizhia, which is on the front line, really, between Russia and Ukraine. And the stray Russian shell managed to hit a power cable quite recently. So Russia is very unpopular with most of the rest of the world. It looks as if Western countries are not doing business with Russia. So what's the effect going to be? Well, the eternal alliance, or the eternal friendship, I should say, between Deng Xiaoping and Vladimir Putin is looking very strong. If the West and the, I'll call the capitalist world, if you like, cuts off its dealings with Russia, then Russia will exploit its eternal friendship and look the other way. And it's interesting that China has, they didn't actually oppose the UN Security Council's attempt to scold Russia for its invasion. They just abstained, which was a pretty diplomatic thing to do, I would say. So in the future, we may see Russia turning more towards China, as it already has to a large extent. The Russian example in annexing Crimea and invading Ukraine may have perhaps encouraged the Chinese to be more aggressive towards Taiwan, which of course they claim as part of mainland China. It's been said, does Putin want to recreate the Soviet Union, recreate Stalin's empire, which extended, its greatest extent, of course, extended as far as Germany and indeed the divided Berlin? Or does Putin want to recreate the Russia of Catherine the Great? In the late 18th century, Catherine oversaw, first of all, the seizure of Crimea from the Turks. And the role of the Turks in all this is interesting. It's what goes around comes around, if you like. Or if he and China form a more cohesive bloc, perhaps we're going to see a repeat of the Mongol Empire. Thank you.